Thank you all for your continued support. If you found this content valuable, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement truly helps us. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Golgotha and the origin of the spear. The world had grown still. Clouds clustered above Jerusalem like gathering witnesses, thick and dark, as if nature itself were refusing to look away. Dust lifted from the ground with every gust of wind, mingling with the cries of mourners, the laughter of soldiers, and the final ragged breaths of the crucified. 3 men hung upon rough beams of wood. The hill known as Golgotha bore them like scars upon the land. Of the 3, the figure in the center had no sin, no crime, no reason to die except for the world's demand for blood. They called him Yeshua of Nazareth, King of the Jews, Son of Mary, Son of God. Below him a Roman soldier stood watch. His name would not be remembered in official scrolls, but his deed would be etched into legend. The Gospels do not name him, but tradition would later call him Longinus, a man of duty, a man of law, a man who had seen death before, who had learned to look past the pain and pleading of those condemned. Yet there was something different in this execution, something unsettling. The sky darkened further. Birds fled. The crowd, once wild and frenzied, fell into murmurs. Some wept, others whispered prophecies, mothers pulled their children close. From the cross, the dying man raised his head, barely. His lips cracked, his body broken by scourge and nail. He cried out words that would echo forever. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then silence. Some said he died at that moment. Others claimed he gave up his spirit willingly, as no man ever had. What mattered was this: he was gone. And yet the ritual demanded proof. Roman custom did not permit crucified bodies to remain unconfirmed. Death had to be certain. The Sabbath was approaching, and so the centurions prepared to break the legs of the condemned to hasten their suffocation. But when they reached the man called Jesus, they paused. He was already still. Too still. His head slumped, his chest unmoving. The centurion stared for a moment. Then, without emotion, without ceremony, he lifted his spear. The blade was forged in the east. A standard-issue Roman lance, long and narrow, made for thrusting. In the hands of a soldier, it was efficient, cold, exact. He drove it into the side of the man upon the cross, a swift strike, practiced and clean. The point pierced the flesh beneath the rib, cutting between bone into the heart. And then the blood came. Not only blood, but water. Witnesses gasped. From the wound both flowed together, strangely separate, as though the body were pouring forth both death and cleansing in a single gesture. Some said it was a miracle. Others believed it was mere physiology, fluid from the pericardium surrounding a failing heart. But in time, the image would be seen differently. The spear had opened not just a man's chest, but a path into divine mystery. It was the final wound, the proof of death, and yet also the beginning of something no empire could explain. The soldier stood back. Perhaps he felt nothing. Perhaps he felt too much. According to tradition, something in him broke. Perhaps his heart, perhaps his sight. Legends say that Longinus had once been blind in one eye, and that the blood and water from the pierced Messiah touched his face and healed him. They say that in that moment, faith struck him as powerfully as any sword. He would later convert, leave the army, and die a martyr. But the scriptures are silent. History prefers myth to silence. The spear was cleaned, stored, forgotten by some, feared by others. It had done its work, but in the years to come that weapon, simple, iron and cold, would be remembered as something else entirely. The lanza, the holy lance, the spear of destiny. Centuries passed, and stories grew around the weapon like moss upon ancient stone. Some claimed the spear was preserved by the first Christians, kept in secret as the most sacred relic of the Passion. Others claimed it passed from hand to hand, from Jerusalem to Antioch, to Edessa, to Constantinople. In the East, tales arose of emperors who carried it into battle, certain that its presence guaranteed victory. In the West, poets and preachers spoke of it as a divine instrument, forged not merely of iron, but of judgment and grace. But in the earliest days, before the Crusades and the cathedrals, the spear remained a quiet question. What does it mean to pierce the Son of God? What does it mean to strike the divine? The wound was more than physical. In Christian theology, it became symbolic. The spear pierced the side from which the church itself was born, As Eve was formed from Adam's rib, so too was the bride of Christ, the Church, born from the wound in his side. The blood and water became sacraments, symbols of Eucharist and baptism, the heart of Christian ritual. Thus, the weapon of execution became an icon of salvation. The hand that wielded it, once the hand of a pagan soldier, became the hand of prophecy. The spear's story did not end on the hill. Some claimed that Joseph of Arimathea preserved the spear along with the nails and the crown of thorns. Others said it was lost in the ruins of Jerusalem, only to be rediscovered by Constantine the Great 3 centuries later. His mother, Helena, was renowned for collecting relics of Christ. The legend tells that she found the true cross. Why not the true spear as well? Where the spear went next depends on whom you ask. Eastern Orthodox traditions point to relics in Armenia. Roman Catholics trace its presence to the Vatican. Later, a spear appears in Vienna, embedded in the regalia of the Holy Roman Emperors. Crusaders in Antioch would claim to find it buried beneath the cathedral, just in time to inspire a miraculous victory against Muslim forces. But those are chapters yet to come. In this first moment, on the hill called Golgotha, the spear was just a soldier's tool, an extension of empire, a weapon of certainty, and yet, for millions, it became the finger of God, not striking, but revealing. The Jewish onlookers saw in the bloodied body of Jesus the fulfillment of Isaiah's suffering servant. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The act of piercing, though brutal, became sacred. Pain became purpose. The early church fathers pondered the moment deeply. Some saw it as proof of Christ's full humanity. Others saw the wound as divine mercy made visible. The flesh of God torn not in anger, but in willing surrender. It was not the nails, they said, but the love of Christ that kept him on the cross. The spear was only the final witness. Art from the earliest Christian centuries depicts the crucifixion with curious consistency. Always the wound in his side, always the blood and water, always the soldier standing near. Sometimes reverent, sometimes indifferent, the figure of Longinus became both villain and saint. A paradox like the cross itself. In time, the spear would become more than relic. It would be legend. It would inspire kings, divide nations, ignite wars. It would be sought by emperors, hidden by priests, and feared by those who believed it held real power. But on that day, at that moment, it was only this, the final confirmation that Christ was truly dead. And from that death, a strange new life began. They removed the body from the cross. Mary held her son. The disciples fled into shadow. The soldier returned to his post. The world turned slowly, unaware that something had changed forever. The veil in the temple had torn. The earth had quaked. And a weapon, forgotten by most, began its long and winding journey into myth. The spear of destiny had tasted divine blood, and the blood would not let the world forget. Relic of power, early church, Rome, and hidden forces. The smoke still rose from Jerusalem 40 years after the crucifixion. In 70 AD, Titus had laid siege to the holy city, razed the temple, and scattered the Jewish people to the winds. The sacred objects of Solomon's temple, the ark, the lampstand, the altar vessels, had vanished into legend or Roman treasury. Yet among the scattered remnants of that first Christian community, whispers persisted of other treasures, sacred relics of the Passion, hidden away, waiting. The spear that had pierced the side of Christ was among them. But where was it? Who held it? And why did it matter? In the early days of the Church, before Constantine's conversion transformed Christianity from persecuted sect to imperial religion, the followers of Christ gathered in catacombs and private homes. They spoke in hushed voices of the resurrection, of miracles witnessed, of prophecies fulfilled. Among them were some who had been present at Golgotha. They remembered the soldier, they remembered the wound, they remembered the blood and water. These first believers did not yet have cathedrals or golden chalices. Their treasures were memories, testimonies, and some claimed actual fragments of the Passion itself. A piece of the true cross, thorns from the crown, nails from the crucifixion, and somewhere, carefully guarded, the Roman spear that had confirmed the death of their Lord. The earliest Christian writings outside the canonical Gospels hint at the spear's preservation. The apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus, written in the 4th century but claiming much earlier sources, describes Joseph of Arimathea not only taking Christ's body for burial, but also gathering the instruments of his suffering. And Joseph took the spear wherewith the soldier had pierced the side of Jesus, the text claims, and he wrapped it in linen, even as he had wrapped the body of the Lord. Whether this is history or pious legend remains hotly debated. What is certain is that by the 3rd century, Christian communities across the eastern Mediterranean were claiming possession of Passion relics. Some authentic, others clearly fabricated, but all serving a powerful psychological and spiritual purpose. They made the distant Christ tangible, present, real. The spear held particular significance because of its dual nature. It was both weapon and witness. It had caused Christ's death, yet confirmed it. It had pierced the divine, yet revealed the divine. In theological terms, it embodied the mystery of the Incarnation itself, the meeting point of human violence and divine mercy. But the political implications were even more profound. When Constantine defeated Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, he claimed to have seen a vision of the cross in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign conquer. The labarum, Constantine's new military standard, bore the Chi-Rho symbol of Christ. For the first time, Christian symbolism became imperial symbolism. The religion of the crucified became the religion of the conqueror. This transformation had immediate implications for Christian relics. What had once been hidden treasures of persecuted communities now became potential instruments of state power. If a general could claim divine favor through the symbol of the cross, how much more powerful would be the actual implements of Christ's passion? Constantine's mother, Helena, understood this instinctively. In 1326 AD, at age 78, she embarked on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land that was as much archaeological expedition as spiritual journey. Her mission, to locate and recover the physical evidence of Christian truth. The church historian Eusebius describes Helena's remarkable discoveries in Jerusalem. Excavating the supposed site of Golgotha, now buried beneath a pagan temple to Venus, her workers uncovered 3 wooden crosses along with the titulus, the inscription that had been placed above Christ's head. But which cross was the true cross? According to Eusebius and later historians like Rufinus, the matter was resolved through a miracle. A dying woman was touched by each cross in turn. Only one healed her, the true cross of Christ. Helena ordered a magnificent basilica built on the site, and portions of the cross were distributed to churches across the empire. But what of the spear? Here the historical record becomes murky, but the legendary accounts are consistent. Helena, having found the cross, the nails and the crown of thorns, also located the Roman lance that had pierced Christ's side. Some accounts place its discovery in a cave near Golgotha. Others claim it was found with the cross itself. Still others suggest it had never been lost at all, but had been carefully preserved by the Jerusalem Christian community through 3 centuries of persecution. What matters is not the archaeological truth, which remains unknowable, but the political reality that emerged. By 330 AD, when Constantine founded Constantinople as the New Rome, the spear was among the imperial relics housed in the Great Palace. The weapon that had once served Roman execution now served Roman legitimacy. The transformation was breathtaking in its audacity. The same empire that had crucified Christ now claimed to rule in his name, wielding the very instruments of his death as symbols of divine approval. The spear became part of the regalia of Christian empire, a fusion of sacred and secular power that would define European politics for over a millennium. But Constantinople was not the end of the spear's journey. It was the beginning of its career as an object of international intrigue. The Eastern Roman Empire guarded its passion relics jealously. The true cross, fragments of which had been distributed throughout Christendom, remained primarily in Constantinople. The spear, however, was kept in the imperial palace, brought out only for the most solemn occasions. Emperors were crowned in its presence. Military expeditions were blessed with its touch. It became, in the Byzantine imagination, a palladium, a protective talisman that guaranteed the empire's survival. This belief was not merely superstitious. In the medieval worldview, divine favor was manifested through material signs. Relics were not simply commemorative objects, but actual repositories of sacred power. The spear that had touched the blood of Christ was believed to retain something of that divine essence. To possess it was to possess a direct connection to the source of all authority, God himself. The psychological effect was enormous. Byzantine emperors who went into battle, knowing they carried the spear of Longinus, fought with a confidence that their enemies could not match. Their soldiers, believing their cause blessed by the most sacred relic in Christendom, showed a courage that often proved decisive. Whether the spear actually possessed supernatural power mattered less than the fact that everyone believed it did. This faith would be tested repeatedly over the centuries. In 614 AD, the Persian emperor Khosrow II captured Jerusalem and carried off what was claimed to be the true cross. The psychological impact on the Byzantine Empire was devastating. If the Persians had captured the cross, what did this say about God's favor toward Christian Rome? Emperor Heraclius spent the next 14 years reconquering the lost territories and recovering the relic, demonstrating how central these objects had become to imperial identity. The spear, however, remained safely in Constantinople throughout these wars. Its presence in the capital was seen as a guarantee that the city itself could never fall. This belief would persist for 8 centuries, until 1453, when Mehmed II's cannons finally breached the Theodosian walls and the last Byzantine emperor died fighting in the rubble of his palace. But long before Constantinople's fall, the spear had begun to fragment, literally and figuratively. By the 8th century, multiple European powers were claiming to possess the true spear of Longinus. How had this happened? The answer lies in the complex politics of relic distribution. Byzantine emperors, faced with the need to cement alliances and demonstrate imperial favor, had begun gifting portions of their passion relics to Western rulers. A splinter of the true cross here, a thorn from the crown there. These fragments carried immense prestige and were received as expressions of the deepest diplomatic respect. The spear proved particularly suitable for this kind of diplomatic gifting. Unlike the crown of thorns, which could not easily be divided, or the true cross, which existed in large enough pieces to be recognizable, the spear could be broken, copied, or multiplied through creative interpretation. A fragment of the original blade, mounted in a new shaft, could become a true spear. A spearhead that had touched the original could acquire its own authenticity. The nail from Christ's cross, inserted into a spear shaft, could transform that shaft into the instrument of Longinus. By the year 800, when Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, at least 3 different spears were being venerated as the spear of Longinus. One remained in Constantinople. Another had appeared in Rome, where it was housed in the Lateran Basilica. A third had somehow reached the court of the Frankish kings, where it became part of what would eventually be known as the imperial regalia of the Holy Roman Empire. Each spear came with its own carefully crafted provenance. Each possessed its own miraculous properties. Each served the political needs of its possessor. The multiplication of the spear was not fraud, it was theology. In the medieval understanding, the sacred could not be diminished by division. Just as the consecrated bread of the Eucharist remained fully the body of Christ regardless of how many pieces it was broken into, so too could the spear of Longinus exist authentically in multiple locations simultaneously. This theological flexibility had profound political implications. No longer could any single ruler claim exclusive access to the spear's power. Instead, multiple kingdoms could base their legitimacy on possession of the true spear. The result was not the diminishment of the relic's importance, but its amplification. Now, instead of one empire claiming divine favor through the spear, 3 or 4 or 5 could make the same claim. The competition was fierce. Rulers commissioned elaborate reliquaries to house their spears. They sponsored scholarly investigations into their authenticity. They promoted pilgrimages to venerate their particular version of the relic. They incorporated the spear into their coronation ceremonies, their battle standards, their diplomatic presentations. The spear had become something unprecedented in the ancient world, a distributed symbol of authority. Unlike the Roman eagle or the Byzantine double-headed eagle, which belonged exclusively to one empire, the spear of Longinus could legitimate multiple kingdoms simultaneously. This multiplicity did not weaken its power, it democratized it. But democratization came with dangers. If every kingdom possessed the true spear, then conflicts between Christian rulers became not merely political disputes but theological crises. When two armies met in battle, each blessed by its own spear of Longinus, which side truly possessed God's favour? The question was more than academic. It went to the heart of medieval concepts of divine justice, legitimate authority, and sacred kingship. These tensions would shape European politics for centuries to come. The Holy Roman Emperors would base their claims to universal authority partly on their possession of the imperial spear. The French kings would counter with their own sacred relics, including their own spear fragments. The English monarchs would eventually acquire their own passion relics. Even distant kingdoms like Hungary and Poland would claim pieces of the true spear. The result was a kind of sacred arms race, with each Christian kingdom striving to accumulate relics that would validate their independence and legitimacy. The spear that had once unified the Christian world under Byzantine or Carolingian authority now became a source of division and competition. Yet this very competition ensured the spear's continued relevance. Far from fading into obscurity as political circumstances changed, the weapon of Longinus remained at the centre of European consciousness. It appeared in chronicles and legends. It inspired art and architecture. It motivated crusades and conquests. It became, paradoxically, both the symbol of Christian unity and the source of Christian conflict. The early church had transformed the spear from an instrument of Roman law into a relic of divine mercy. The Byzantine Empire had transformed it from a relic into an instrument of political power. Now, as multiple kingdoms claimed its authority, it was being transformed once again, from a single object into a distributed network of sacred power that would reshape the political landscape of medieval Europe. The spear that had pierced the side of Christ had itself been pierced, by politics, by ambition, by the competing claims of Christian kings. But like the wound it had inflicted, this fragmentation did not diminish its power. Instead, it multiplied it, spreading the authority of Longinus across the continent like drops of sacred blood. The true conquest of Europe by the spear of destiny was about to begin. Crusaders and conquerors, the spear in medieval Europe. The year was 1098. The walls of Antioch rose like stone prayers against the Syrian sky, ancient and seemingly impregnable. For 8 months, the armies of the First Crusade had laid siege to this fortress city, their ranks thinning from disease, starvation, and the constant harassment of Muslim forces. What had begun as a holy war to liberate Jerusalem was degenerating into a nightmare of logistics and despair. Inside the city, the situation was no better. The Christian population, caught between their Muslim rulers and their would-be liberators, faced persecution from both sides. Among them was a priest named Peter Bartholomew, a man of humble origins, whose visions would soon reshape the course of the crusade, and add another chapter to the legend of the spear. On the night of June 10th, as the Crusaders prepared for what many believed would be their final battle, Peter Bartholomew approached the leaders of the expedition with an extraordinary claim. Christ himself, he declared, had appeared to him in a vision, revealing the location of the Holy Lance, the very spear that had pierced the Saviour's side on Calvary. The spear, according to Peter's vision, lay buried beneath the floor of the Cathedral of St. Peter in Antioch. Not only that, but Christ had promised that whoever carried this sacred weapon into battle would be granted certain victory over the infidel. Count Raymond of Toulouse, the expedition's most powerful noble, was skeptical but desperate. Other leaders were openly doubtful. How could the spear be in Antioch when everyone knew it resided in Constantinople with the Byzantine emperor? But the common soldiers, starving and terrified, seized upon the vision with the fervour of men who had nothing left but faith. The excavation began immediately. In the flickering light of torches, beneath the ancient stones of the cathedral, the Crusaders dug through the night. Hour after hour they worked, their hands raw and bleeding, finding nothing but earth and broken pottery. Dawn approached. Doubt crept in. Some began to whisper that Peter Bartholomew was a fraud, a madman, or worse, a heretic sent to lead them astray. Then, as the first light of morning filtered through the cathedral windows, a cry went up from the excavation site. There, in the deepest part of the pit, glinting dully in the torchlight, was the unmistakable shape of a spear point. What happened next would be debated by historians for centuries. Did Peter Bartholomew actually discover an ancient relic? Was the spear planted in the pit by conspirators seeking to boost morale? Was it a piece of Byzantine craftsmanship hidden by Christian residents of the city? Or was it, as the Crusaders fervently believed, a genuine miracle, the Holy Lance itself, revealed by Christ to aid his warriors in their darkest hour? The truth mattered less than the effect. Word of the discovery spread through the Crusader camp like wildfire. Men who had been preparing to die suddenly found themselves preparing to conquer. The spear was mounted on a shaft of Lebanese cedar, blessed by the expedition's clergy, and proclaimed as the authentic weapon of Longinus. 3 days later, the Christian army marched out of Antioch carrying their newfound talisman. They faced a massive Muslim force under Kerbaga, the Atabeg of Mosul, who had come to relieve the besieged city. By all military logic, the exhausted and outnumbered Crusaders should have been annihilated. Instead, they achieved one of the most decisive victories in the history of medieval warfare. The Battle of Antioch became legend even as it was being fought. Christian chroniclers described supernatural warriors fighting alongside the Crusaders, Saints George, Demetrius, and Theodore, mounted on white horses, their lances gleaming with divine light. Whether these apparitions were real or imagined, the psychological effect was undeniable. The Crusaders fought with the desperate courage of men who believed God himself was leading them into battle. The Muslim army, veteran fighters who had expected an easy victory over a demoralized enemy, found themselves facing fanatics who seemed immune to fear. Kerbaga's forces broke and fled, leaving behind their camp, their treasure, and their reputation for invincibility. The road to Jerusalem lay open. The Holy Lance of Antioch, as it came to be known, had proven its power. But its triumph would be short-lived. As the crusading army advanced toward Jerusalem, disputes arose over the spear's authenticity. Some of the expedition's leaders, particularly those from northern France, openly questioned whether the relic was genuine. They pointed out that the Byzantine emperor possessed what was universally acknowledged to be the true spear. How could there be 2 authentic lances of Longinus? The controversy came to a head during the siege of Jerusalem in 1099. Peter Bartholomew, still claiming divine visions, continued to promote his spear as the genuine article, but his credibility was undermined by increasingly grandiose claims and erratic behavior. Some accused him of using the spear as a tool for personal advancement. Others suggested he was mentally unstable. The matter was resolved through trial by ordeal, a common medieval method for determining divine truth. Peter Bartholomew would walk through a corridor of burning logs while carrying the spear. If he emerged unharmed, the relic would be proven authentic. If he was burned, it would be exposed as a fraud. On Good Friday 1099, before an audience of thousands, Peter Bartholomew entered the flames. He emerged on the other side, but his body was horribly burned. He died 4 days later, never having renounced his claims about the spear's authenticity. The Holy Lance of Antioch did not survive its discoverer. Some accounts suggest it was lost during the subsequent conquest of Jerusalem. Others claim it was deliberately destroyed by embarrassed church officials. Whatever its fate, the spear that had inspired the greatest victory of the First Crusade vanished from history as suddenly as it had appeared. But the episode revealed something crucial about the nature of sacred power in medieval Europe. Authenticity mattered less than effectiveness. The spear's brief career demonstrated that even a questionable relic could channel genuine religious fervor and political energy. The weapon that had failed the test of fire had nonetheless helped conquer the Holy Land. Meanwhile, far to the north, a very different spear was beginning its own rise to prominence. In the treasure chambers of the German kings, among the regalia that would soon become the symbols of the Holy Roman Empire, lay what claimed to be the original lance of Longinus. This spear, unlike the doomed weapon of Antioch, would endure for centuries and shape the destiny of nations. The imperial spear, as it came to be known, first appears definitively in historical records during the reign of Otto I in the 10th century. Otto, King of Germany and later Holy Roman Emperor, claimed that the spear had been passed down through a chain of Christian rulers stretching back to Constantine the Great. Whether this genealogy was accurate was less important than the fact that Otto believed it, and acted accordingly. On August 10th, 955, Otto carried the spear into battle against the Magyars at Lechfeld, near Augsburg. The Hungarian raiders had terrorized Central Europe for decades, their swift cavalry strikes reducing entire regions to smoking ruins. No Christian army had been able to stand against them. But Otto, bearing what he believed to be the weapon that had pierced Christ's side, was confident of victory. The Battle of Lechfeld was as decisive as Antioch had been. The Magyar forces, seemingly invincible for so long, were completely routed. Their military power was broken forever, and Hungary would soon convert to Christianity and become part of the European political order. Otto's victory was seen as divinely ordained, and the spear's role in achieving it became part of German royal legend. From that moment forward, the imperial spear became inseparable from the legitimacy of German kingship. Every coronation included a ceremony in which the new ruler was invested with the spear along with the other imperial regalia. To possess the spear was to possess a direct mandate from God to rule not just Germany, but all of Christendom. This belief would have profound consequences for European politics. The Holy Roman Empire, unlike other medieval kingdoms, claimed universal authority. Its emperors saw themselves not as kings among equals, but as the earthly representatives of Christ's dominion. The spear provided tangible proof of this extraordinary claim. Under the Ottonian dynasty, the spear accompanied German armies across Europe. It was present at the conquest of Italy, the subjugation of Poland, and the endless struggles with papal authority. Each victory seemed to confirm its power. Each defeat raised uncomfortable questions about whether the spear's blessing had been withdrawn. The weapon itself was a remarkable object. Medieval descriptions speak of a spear point of dark iron, mounted on a shaft of olive wood bound with silver wire. Most distinctively, a nail was embedded in the blade, supposedly one of the nails from Christ's crucifixion, inserted to authenticate the spear's connection to the Passion. The craftsmanship was exquisite, suggesting Byzantine or Italian workmanship of the 8th or 9th century. Modern analysis would later reveal that the spearhead was indeed ancient, though not necessarily from the 1st century. The nail, however, was clearly a later addition, probably inserted during the Carolingian period as part of an effort to enhance the relic's credentials. But in the medieval period, such details mattered little. What mattered was the faith the spear inspired, and the power it represented. That power reached its zenith under Frederick Barbarossa, who ruled the Holy Roman Empire from 1152 to 1190. Frederick, whose red beard gave him his nickname, was perhaps the most charismatic and ambitious emperor of the medieval period. He dreamed of restoring the glory of ancient Rome under Christian auspices, and he saw the spear as the key to achieving that vision. Frederick carried the spear on 6 separate military campaigns in Italy, each aimed at asserting imperial authority over the fractious city-states and the papal territories. The weapon became his personal talisman, never leaving his side during major battles or important negotiations. Italian chroniclers learned to dread the sight of the emperor's banner and the glint of the sacred spear beside it. The spear's presence seemed to make Frederick invincible. At the Battle of Carcano in 1160, imperial forces routed a much larger coalition of Lombard cities. At the Siege of Milan in 1162, the city's defenders surrendered rather than face the emperor who carried the weapon of Longinus. For nearly 3 decades, the spear and its bearer dominated European politics. But Frederick's ultimate ambition lay beyond Europe. In 1189, now in his 70s, he took the cross and joined the Third Crusade. The spear would accompany him to the Holy Land, where it would face its greatest test since the days of the Antioch Crusaders. The Third Crusade was a response to Saladin's reconquest of Jerusalem in 1187. The flower of European knighthood, Frederick Barbarossa, Richard the Lionheart of England, and Philip Augustus of France, had united to reclaim the Holy City. Frederick's army was the largest and most experienced of the three, and his possession of the Holy Lance was seen as a guarantee of Christian victory. The expedition began auspiciously. Frederick's forces crossed the Byzantine Empire without major incident, defeated a Seljuk army at Iconium, and approached the borders of the Holy Land with their formation intact and their morale high. The spear had once again proven its worth. Then disaster struck. On June 10th, 1190, while crossing the river Salef in Asia Minor, Frederick Barbarossa drowned. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Some accounts suggest he suffered a heart attack while swimming, others that he was thrown from his horse and dragged down by his armour. What is certain is that the most powerful ruler in Europe died suddenly and unexpectedly, leaving his army leaderless and his crusade in ruins. The psychological impact was devastating. How could the bearer of the Holy Lance perish so ignominiously? Where was the divine protection that the spear was supposed to provide? Frederick's army, shocked and demoralized, began to disintegrate. Most never reached the Holy Land. The Third Crusade continued under Richard and Philip, but without the German contingent, it could never achieve its ultimate goal. The spear returned to Germany with Frederick's bones, but its reputation was forever changed. The aura of invincibility had been shattered. Future emperors would still carry it into battle, but never again with the absolute confidence that had characterized the reigns of Otto I and Frederick Barbarossa. Yet the spear's political importance, if anything, increased. As the Holy Roman Empire faced new challenges, the rise of France, the growing independence of Italy, the threat of Ottoman expansion, the weapon became even more crucial as a symbol of imperial legitimacy. If German emperors could no longer claim to be invincible in battle, they could at least claim to be the rightful heirs of Constantine and Charlemagne. The spear's role in coronation ceremonies became increasingly elaborate. New emperors were not simply invested with the weapon, they were required to demonstrate their worthiness to wield it. Chronicles describe complex rituals in which candidates had to fast, pray, and undergo spiritual preparation before being allowed to touch the sacred relic. The spear had become not just a symbol of power, but a test of character. This emphasis on moral worthiness reflected broader changes in medieval Christianity. The crude theology of earlier centuries, which saw divine favor primarily in terms of military victory, was giving way to more sophisticated concepts of Christian kingship. Rulers were expected to be not just successful warriors, but also just judges, pious believers, and defenders of the church. The spear adapted to these changing expectations. Where once it had been primarily a weapon of conquest, it now became an instrument of justice. Emperors invoked its authority when making legal decisions, settling disputes, or establishing new institutions. The weapon that had pierced Christ's side became a symbol of the wisdom and mercy that should characterize Christian governance. This transformation was reflected in the artistic depictions of the spear that proliferated during the later medieval period. Early representations had shown it primarily in battle scenes, held by triumphant emperors standing over defeated enemies. Later images depicted it in more peaceful contexts: courtroom scenes, coronation ceremonies, acts of charity and mercy. The most famous of these artistic works was the Golden Bull of 1356, Emperor Charles IV's constitutional document that established the electoral system of the Holy Roman Empire. The illuminated manuscript shows Charles receiving the spear from Christ himself, with the inscription making clear that the weapon represents not military might, but the responsibility to rule justly and protect the innocent. By the late medieval period, the spear had become central to German national identity in ways that transcended politics. It appeared in epic poems like the Nibelungenlied, where it was associated with concepts of honor, loyalty, and tragic destiny. It featured in the mystical writings of Meister Eckhart and other German theologians, who saw it as a symbol of the soul's relationship with God. It inspired architectural monuments, liturgical innovations, and elaborate ceremonial protocols. The weapon had become more than a relic or even a political symbol. It had become the material embodiment of the German claim to leadership of Christian Europe. As that claim faced increasing challenges from France, England, and the emerging nation-states of the Renaissance, the spear's symbolic importance only grew. But the medieval period was drawing to a close. The unified Christendom that had given the spear its meaning was fragmenting into competing kingdoms, each with its own sacred relics and national myths. The Protestant Reformation would soon challenge the entire theological framework that had made relic veneration possible. The discovery of the New World would shift Europe's attention away from the Holy Land and toward global expansion. The spear that had shaped medieval Europe was about to enter a new and more complex phase of its career. The age of crusades and emperors was ending. The age of nation-states and religious wars was about to begin. And through it all, the weapon that claimed to have pierced the side of Christ would continue to exert its strange power over the human imagination, adapting to new circumstances while never losing its fundamental appeal. The promise that divine authority could be made tangible, that sacred power could be wielded by mortal hands, and that the destiny of nations could be shaped by faith as much as by force. The spear's medieval career had proven that relics were not simply objects of devotion, but instruments of transformation. They could turn defeats into victories, legitimize revolutions, and reshape entire civilizations. As Europe entered the modern world, the question remained: what new transformations would the Spear of Destiny bring about? The answer would emerge in the centuries to come, as the weapon faced challenges that would make the conflicts of the medieval period seem almost simple by comparison. Forbidden knowledge, the spear in Gnostic and apocryphal writings. In the shadowed alcoves of the Library of Alexandria, before the flames consumed millennia of human knowledge, there existed texts that told a different story of the spear. Not the tale of emperors and crusaders, not the legend of military triumph and political legitimacy, but something far more dangerous. The secret of what the weapon truly was, and what it had actually pierced on that hill called Golgotha. These were the hidden Gospels, the forbidden wisdom, the texts that the Church Fathers had declared heretical and ordered destroyed. Yet like all dangerous knowledge, they survived in fragments, whispered in the shadows, copied by hand in remote monasteries where curious monks dared to preserve what they were commanded to forget. The Gnostics, those who claimed gnosis, direct spiritual knowledge of the divine mysteries, saw the crucifixion very differently than the Orthodox Christians who would eventually triumph. For them, the spear was not simply a Roman soldier's weapon or even a sacred relic. It was a cosmic instrument, a key that had unlocked the greatest secret in the universe, the true nature of reality itself. To understand their vision, one must first understand their cosmos. The Gnostics taught that the material world was not the creation of the supreme God, but of a lesser deity, the demiurge, a false creator who had fashioned the physical universe as a kind of prison for divine sparks of light that had fallen from the true spiritual realm. Humanity was trapped in this material prison, unaware of their true divine nature, manipulated by archons, demonic rulers who served the demiurge and sought to keep souls enslaved in ignorance. Christ, in this understanding, was not the son of the demiurge, but an emissary from the supreme God, sent to awaken humanity to their true spiritual nature. His mission was not to die for humanity's sins, but to teach them the secret knowledge that would allow them to escape the material prison and return to the divine realm of light. The crucifixion, therefore, was not God's plan for salvation, but the demiurge's desperate attempt to silence the bearer of liberating truth. And the spear that pierced Christ's side was not wielded by chance, but was directed by cosmic forces that understood exactly what they were trying to destroy. This radically different interpretation appears most clearly in the Gospel of Philip, discovered among the Nag Hammadi texts in 1945. Written in Coptic but translated from an earlier Greek original, this Gospel contains a passage that sent shockwaves through the scholarly community when it was first translated. The lance which pierced his side opened more than flesh. It opened the veil between worlds. Through that wound, the light that had been imprisoned in matter escaped back to its source. But the lance itself was transformed by what it touched. It became a bridge between the realm of matter and the realm of spirit, a key to the gnosis that the archons fear above all else. The implications were staggering. If the Gospel of Philip was to be believed, the spear had not simply confirmed Christ's death, but had actually facilitated the completion of his spiritual mission. The wound was not evidence of defeat, but of triumph, the moment when the divine light, temporarily incarnated in Jesus, returned to its proper realm, leaving behind a weapon that had been forever changed by its contact with the divine. But the Gospel of Philip was not alone in presenting this alternative vision. The secret Gospel of James, another Gnostic text, describes a post-resurrection appearance of Christ in which he explains the true meaning of his death to his disciples. "You saw the soldier pierce my side with the lance, and you mourned, thinking I was slain. But I tell you truly, that wound was the greatest gift the Father could give to humanity. For through that opening the way has been prepared for all who possess the gnosis to follow me back to the realm of light. The lance has become the staff of the shepherd leading his flock home." These texts presented the spear not as a relic to be venerated, but as an active spiritual tool, a means by which initiated souls could access the same divine knowledge that Christ had possessed. The weapon became, in Gnostic understanding, a symbol of awakening, enlightenment, and liberation from the illusions of the material world. The theological implications were revolutionary. Orthodox Christianity taught that salvation came through faith in Christ's sacrificial death and resurrection. Gnosticism taught that salvation came through direct spiritual knowledge, gnosis, that allowed individuals to recognize their own divine nature. The spear, having pierced the incarnate Logos, had become a conduit for that knowledge. This interpretation found expression in a series of ritual texts that have survived in fragmentary form. The ceremony of the sacred lance, preserved in a 4th century manuscript discovered in a cave near Qumran, describes an initiation rite in which candidates for gnosis undergo a symbolic piercing that mirrors Christ's wound. "Let the seeker approach the lance in darkness, for in darkness the light shines brightest. Let him present his side to the sacred point, not to be wounded in flesh, but to be opened in spirit. For as the lance opened the side of the Logos, so must the soul be opened to receive the light that flows from the pleroma." The ceremony, as described in the text, involved participants placing themselves in meditative trance, while a replica of the lance was held against their ribs. The goal was not physical piercing, but spiritual opening, a moment of gnosis in which the initiate would experience direct contact with the divine light. These practices were not mere symbolism. Gnostic communities across the eastern Mediterranean appear to have possessed actual spear replicas that they believed carried some essence of the original weapon. Archaeological evidence from sites in Syria and Egypt has uncovered ceremonial spearheads inscribed with Gnostic symbols and formulas, suggesting that these communities took their ritual use of the lance very seriously indeed. The most detailed account of such practices comes from the writings of Epiphanius of Salamis, a 4th century heresy hunter who infiltrated various Gnostic groups to expose their beliefs and practices. Though deeply hostile to Gnosticism, his descriptions provide invaluable insights into how these communities understood and used the spear. They possess among them a lance of iron, which they claim was forged from filings of the true lance that pierced the Saviour's side. This weapon they employ in their most secret mysteries, believing that it can pierce the veil of matter and reveal the spiritual realities that lie beyond. I have witnessed their ceremonies, though I dare not describe them fully, for they involve practices that would scandalize the faithful. What Epiphanius dared not describe was likely the full extent of Gnostic lance ceremonies, which appear to have involved not only meditation and visualization, but also practices that Orthodox Christians considered deeply threatening. Some Gnostic groups taught that the lance could be used to pierce the false teachings of the Orthodox Church, revealing the hidden spiritual truths that lay beneath conventional religious doctrine. This use of the spear as an instrument of theological criticism appears most clearly in the Gospel of Truth, attributed to the Gnostic teacher Valentinus. In this text, the lance becomes a metaphor for the penetrating power of gnosis itself. The lance that pierced him pierces still, cutting through the lies that bind the soul in darkness. Those who would follow the path of light must take up this lance and pierce the veil of ignorance that separates them from their true nature. For the wound that seemed to destroy was actually the key to transformation. The political implications of this teaching were obvious. If the spear could be used to pierce false teachings, Then it could be wielded against the authority of bishops, the doctrines of councils, and the entire institutional structure of the emerging Orthodox Church. The weapon that emperors claimed legitimized their rule could, in Gnostic hands, delegitimize all earthly authority in favor of direct spiritual experience. This threat was not lost on church authorities. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, while primarily focused on the Arian controversy, also issued condemnations of various Gnostic teachings, including explicit warnings against the blasphemous use of sacred relics for purposes of spiritual deception. While the spear was not mentioned by name, the intent was clear. Any use of passion relics outside official church supervision was to be considered heretical. But persecution only drove Gnostic lance traditions deeper underground. In the 5th and 6th centuries, as the Roman Empire collapsed and Christian orthodoxy consolidated its power, Gnostic communities retreated to remote regions where they could continue their practices in secret. Monasteries in the Egyptian desert, mountain communities in Syria, and isolated settlements in Mesopotamia all harbored groups that maintained their own versions of the lance tradition. The most sophisticated of these traditions developed among the Mandaeans, a Gnostic sect that survives to this day in Iraq and Iran. Mandaean texts from the medieval period describe the lance in terms that would have been familiar to the earliest Gnostics, but with additional layers of cosmological complexity. The lance of light pierces the 7 heavens and the 12 aeons. It is the axis around which the spheres revolve, the thread that connects the world of darkness to the world of light. Those who understand its mystery can travel between the worlds, ascending from the prison of matter to the freedom of spirit. This cosmological understanding of the spear appears to have influenced medieval Islamic mysticism as well. Sufi texts from the 9th and 10th centuries contain references to a spear of gnosis that bears striking resemblances to Gnostic lance symbolism. The great Sufi poet Rumi, writing in the 13th century, penned verses that seem to echo the ancient Gnostic understanding. There is a lance that wounds without cutting, that opens what was closed without breaking. Seek this lance in the cave of the heart, for it alone can pierce the veil of separation. Whether Rumi was directly influenced by Gnostic lance traditions or arrived at similar insights independently is unclear. What is certain is that the mystical interpretation of the spear continued to evolve and spread, finding expression in various esoteric traditions across the Mediterranean and Middle East. The most dramatic resurgence of Gnostic lance traditions occurred during the medieval Cathar movement in southern France. The Cathars, also known as Albigensians, were dualistic Christians who taught that the material world was created by an evil demiurge, while human souls were divine sparks trapped in matter, classic Gnostic theology. Their understanding of the lance reflected this worldview. Cathar Perfect, the initiated elite of the movement, possessed what they claimed were fragments of the true lance, obtained through secret channels from Eastern Christian communities. These fragments were not displayed publicly or used in conventional religious ceremonies. Instead, they formed the centerpiece of the Cathar ritual known as the consolamentum, the spiritual baptism that marked full initiation into the sect. Inquisition records from the 13th century provide disturbing glimpses into these ceremonies. Jacques Fournier, later Pope Benedict XII, interrogated numerous Cathars and recorded their testimonies about the use of the lance fragments. They believe that the lance which pierced our Lord contains within it the power to pierce the veil between this world and the next. In their ceremony of consolamentum, they place the fragment against the heart of the initiate, while reciting blasphemous formulas that I dare not repeat. They claim that this opens the soul to direct contact with what they call the true God as opposed to the God of this world. The Cathar understanding of the lance as a tool for transcending material reality posed a direct challenge to Catholic authority. If individuals could achieve direct contact with God through Gnostic practices involving the spear, what need was there for priests, sacraments, or the institutional church? The lance had become, once again, an instrument of spiritual revolution. The Albigensian Crusade, launched in 1209, was officially fought to suppress Cathar heresy. But the systematic destruction of Cathar communities also served to eliminate one of the most sophisticated surviving traditions of Gnostic Lance mysticism. When the last Cathar stronghold at Montségur fell in 1244, the defenders were burned alive, and their sacred objects, including their lance fragments, were destroyed. Yet even as Orthodox Christianity thought it had eliminated the Gnostic threat, new forms of lance mysticism were emerging. The medieval period saw the rise of various mystical movements that, while nominally orthodox, incorporated elements that were distinctly Gnostic in character. The most influential of these was the tradition associated with the legendary Knight Templars. While the full extent of Templar beliefs remains disputed, evidence suggests that at least some members of the order possessed alternative interpretations of Christian relics, including the lance. The Templar understanding appears to have combined Gnostic themes with Islamic mysticism, acquired during their long residence in the Holy Land. Surviving Templar texts speak of the lance not as a mere relic, but as a key to the hidden wisdom of Solomon, a reference that suggests familiarity with both Gnostic and Kabbalistic traditions. When the Templars were suppressed in 1307, their interrogators discovered ritual objects that included what appeared to be replica spearheads inscribed with symbols that combined Christian, Islamic, and seemingly Gnostic elements. The meaning of these objects was never fully deciphered, but their existence suggests that alternative lance traditions had survived and evolved within the heart of medieval Christendom. The Renaissance brought a renewed interest in ancient texts and alternative spiritual traditions. Humanist scholars, working with newly discovered manuscripts, began to piece together the fragmentary remains of Gnostic literature. What they found challenged many conventional assumptions about early Christianity, including orthodox understandings of the lance. Marsilio Ficino, the great Renaissance philosopher and translator, encountered Gnostic texts during his work on the Corpus Hermeticum. His private correspondence reveals a fascination with alternative interpretations of the crucifixion and the spear's role in it. If these ancient texts speak truly, then the lance which we venerate as a relic of Christ's passion may be something far more significant, a key to mysteries that the Church has forgotten or chosen to suppress. The wound it inflicted was not the end of the divine mission, but its culmination, opening a path between heaven and earth that still exists for those who know how to find it. Ficino's interest in Gnostic lance traditions influenced a generation of Renaissance mystics and philosophers. Giordano Bruno, the radical philosopher who was eventually burned at the stake for heresy, wrote extensively about the spear as a symbol of the divine spark within humanity that seeks to return to its source. The lance that pierced the God-man pierces still, Bruno wrote in his treatise on the infinite universe and worlds. It pierces the shell of ignorance that surrounds the soul, revealing the infinite cosmos that lies within. Those who would know the truth must allow themselves to be pierced by this lance of gnosis, for only through such piercing can the soul expand to embrace its true, infinite nature. Bruno's execution in 1600 marked the end of open discussion of alternative lance traditions in Catholic Europe, but the ideas he and others had articulated continued to circulate in underground networks of mystics, alchemists, and esoteric philosophers. The Protestant Reformation, while officially rejecting Catholic relic veneration, inadvertently created space for alternative spiritual traditions to flourish. Without the centralizing authority of Rome, various Protestant sects developed their own interpretations of Christian symbolism, some of which echoed ancient Gnostic themes. The most significant of these was the tradition that emerged among certain Rosicrucian groups in 17th century Germany. Rosicrucian texts speak of the spear of truth that can pierce through religious deception to reveal the underlying spiritual reality. While nominally Christian, this understanding clearly draws on Gnostic sources. The spear of truth is not made of iron, but of purified consciousness. It exists not in any earthly treasury, but in the heart of the seeker. When wielded by one who has achieved true gnosis, it can pierce through all veils of illusion, revealing the unity that underlies the apparent diversity of creation. This internalization of the lance, transforming it from external relic to inner spiritual reality, represented a significant evolution in esoteric Christian thought. The weapon that had once been understood as a physical object imbued with divine power was now conceived as a state of consciousness accessible to any sincere seeker. The implications were profound. If the true lance existed within human consciousness, rather than in any external relic, then all the political and religious conflicts over possession of the physical spear were revealed as elaborate distractions from the real spiritual work. The emperors and crusaders who had fought over the weapon had been pursuing shadows, while the reality remained hidden in plain sight. This perspective would prove increasingly influential as Europe moved into the modern period. The rationalism of the Enlightenment called into question the entire framework of relic veneration, while Romantic movements sought new forms of spiritual experience that did not depend on institutional authority. The Gnostic understanding of the lance as a tool for direct spiritual realization seemed perfectly suited to these new intellectual and cultural currents. Yet even as the external tradition of lance veneration declined, the inner tradition continued to evolve. Secret societies, mystical lodges, and esoteric schools across Europe maintained their own versions of lance symbolism, each adding new layers of interpretation while preserving the essential Gnostic insight that the spear was not primarily a historical relic, but a timeless spiritual reality. The 19th century saw a remarkable flowering of interest in alternative Christian traditions. Scholars like G.R.S. Mead began translating and publishing Gnostic texts that had been hidden for centuries. What they revealed was a rich tradition of lance mysticism that had survived in fragments across the Mediterranean world. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of new movements that claimed to possess not ancient texts but living traditions, unbroken lineages of initiates who had preserved the secret teachings about the spear's true nature and purpose. These claims would prove to be among the most controversial aspects of modern esoteric Christianity. Did such lineages actually exist? Had the Gnostic understanding of the lance truly survived in hidden communities across the centuries? Or were these modern movements simply reconstructing ancient teachings from fragmentary texts? The questions became more than academic when some of these groups began to assert that they possessed not only the teachings, but the actual spiritual power that the lance represented. They claimed to be able to induce the same kind of mystical experiences that the ancient Gnostics had associated with the spear: direct contact with divine consciousness, liberation from material limitations, and access to hidden knowledge about the nature of reality. As Europe entered the 20th century, the ancient Gnostic understanding of the lance was about to encounter its greatest test. The rational worldview of modernity seemed to have no place for mystical interpretations of religious relics. Yet something in the human psyche continued to resonate with the Gnostic insight that the spear represented more than political power or historical artifact. The weapon that had begun as a Roman soldier's tool evolved into an imperial symbol and been transformed by the Gnostics into a key to spiritual enlightenment was about to face its most complex challenge yet: the technological age, with its new forms of power and its new questions about the nature of reality itself. The spear's journey through the shadows of forbidden knowledge had revealed its most profound secret: that its true power lay not in its material form but in its capacity to symbolize humanity's deepest spiritual longings. The Gnostics had understood what the emperors and crusaders had missed: that the real spear was not something to be possessed, but something to become. As the modern world struggled with questions of meaning, purpose, and spiritual truth, the ancient Gnostic vision of the lance would prove more relevant than anyone could have imagined. The weapon that had pierced the veil between worlds was about to pierce the veil between past and future, revealing new possibilities for human consciousness and spiritual evolution.